Okay, as you know, we are now going to have an experiment curated by Gautam. So instead of reading a specific book, we are going to get into the deep dive of the author behind the book. So hopefully he will talk about it, why he felt that is a better idea. So now going forward, we are not going to have birthday songs because I think there's people who can sing, so they are better than the curated ones. So we have Abdul and Arun Kaul are the birthday boys, and today Abdul is with us. So he is going to talk a minute to be with us so that we can wish him in person.
Happy birthday, Abdul.
Thank you.
Happy
Thank you.
birthday.
Happy
Happy
birthday,
Happy
Abdul.
birthday.
Thank you,
Happy birthday,
guys.
Atul.
Happy birthday.
I thought Abdul was going to sing, Yanks.
I know, I was
No,
also waiting
that
for
would be
that.
that
Yeah,
would
he's
be
about to. He's about to.
singing would
Go ahead.
violate human rights of all of
If
you.
other guys allow him to talk.
Yeah.
You know, I had a friend in college who
Abdul,
used
you
to
are
always
muted.
tell me that Abdul, you were born middle-aged, and after that you have only gotten older. And sometimes I think that is so true. I'm in my 70s now, and this year I am planning to retire after 38 years of teaching. I
Wow.
started work in 1973 in Connaught Place in Delhi. That's where I started. And since then I have been working. But let me tell you this. Of all the years that I can look back, the two best years were the years that I spent with you guys. And every
Wow.
opportunity that I get to spend with you guys, I would cherish every minute of that. That's all I need to say.
Great.
Oh, nice.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Abdul.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Except
Honored, Abdul, honored.
Abdul tells it to all the girls, huh? So you have to understand that as well.
Happy birthday.
And they're only in your 70s, Abdul. I thought you were in 80s.
Correct.
It's just that I look like 80s.
No, you don't.
Ah.
No, you don't.
Okay, now let us hear what PG has to say.
Mr. Woodhouse, would it be indelicate to inquire how many years it is since you first began writing?
Oh, it's, if you work it out, 1902, 56 years. Let's say 56 years since I've supported myself as a writer. I actually started in 1900, which makes it 58. But I was in the Hong Kong Bank in those 2 years, and in 1902 I left to become a professional writer.
And in that time, how many books have you written?
I've written 77, which is just one for every year of my life.
When was your first Jeeves book?
Well, the first actual Jeeves story was in 1916.
Was he your favourite character?
Yes, on the whole. He and Bertie Wooster, yes, I think so, except perhaps Lord Emsworth.
It's fairly clear that in the welfare state in Britain at the present time, the world of Jeeves and Bertie Wooster really doesn't exist anymore. I'm wondering if it ever did exist.
Oh, I think unquestionably in roundabout before the First World War, I think those characters that I write about are more or less true to life at that time. Say up to 1914, I think certainly as a young man I used to know them by the score. But of course now I imagine they are all more or less. I always look on myself as writing historical novels these days.
So that is PG in person.
Mr. Woodhouse, would it...
Thank you, Srinivas. That was wonderful. So before we hand over the stage to Gautam, on behalf of all of us, I just want to extend a very warm welcome to our guest speaker, Sunil Agarwal, who, as you would remember, endeared all of us with his 40th year reunion book in Kolkata, and more recently with his work on Crazy Bosses. So more about that as Gautam speaks. But first, let's hear Gautam on how he thought about this session and what he has lined up for us. Go ahead, Gautam.
Thanks, Milind. And morning, guys. Just sharing some thoughts. Over the past 4 years, we've had a terrific run with books at our book club get-togethers. Personally, I've read many books that I would not have otherwise and learned new perspectives. But I realize also that we have learned practically nothing about these numerous books' authors. And to my mind, these authors deserve as much attention and respect as we have given to their books. And I believe that would enhance our appreciation of what we take away from the book club. Much like we do with music, we tend to enjoy it more when we know stuff about the creators of our music, such as that the Queen band's lead, Brian May, is an astrophysicist, that Simon and Garfunkel broke up to our deep dismay several times, that Kishore Kumar was the brother of actor Ashok Kumar, that their family name was Ganguly and that they were Bongs, that certain songs have deeper meanings than the lyrics seem to imply. For example, Hurricane by Bob Dylan, Stairway to Heaven by Led Zepp, Hotel California by the Eagles. And that there is an infamous 27 club in music. Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Amy Whitehouse, all performers that died at 27. And this knowledge, to my mind, somehow enhances our appreciation of their music. So Yanks, Milind and I, we thought we'd do an experiment with a session on an iconic storyteller, specifically P.G. Wodehouse, who most, if not all of us, have read and revere. Different from the usual theme of discussion centered on a specific book or books. We chose to vote on characters we want to know more about. In sum, this session is designed to help us know an author, the variety of characters that he created, what made him special, turns of phrase that he used, new words that have endeared him to the book reading world. So with these aims in mind, our first reflector is Abdul. He will speak to us on the life story of Wodehouse, stuff he feels will enhance our knowledge and appreciation of both the man and the author. The next reflector is Ishan, who will educate us on some timeless quotes from P.G. Wodehouse books, present us with a bunch of strange but delightful words that P.G. Wodehouse coined, turns of phrase and uncommon words that he used. I'm hoping Ishan will tell us how to be gruntled rather than disgruntled. Our final four reflectors will talk to us of one P.G. Wodehouse character each. The four that we chose through our voting system. Speaking of their positioning and role in Wodehouse books, what made them hilarious characters, what were their most charming and endearing characteristics, and perhaps recommend a few great-to-read books. They are, first, Kenny, reflecting on the ubiquitous Jeeves, the greatest valet of them all, and who could buttle with the best, according to Bertie Wooster. Reginald Jeeves, perhaps the best known of all P.G. Wodehouse characters. Then Meyer, reflecting on Bertram Wilberforce Wooster, Bertie Wooster to his friends, the dandy, dim-witted man about town and employer of Jeeves. Followed by Maurice, reflecting on Aunt Agatha Gregson, Bertie's haughty and overbearing aunt. And finally, Tunku, reflecting on Lord Emsworth, full name Clarence Threepwood, the eccentric lord of Lord Blandings Castle and of the Empress of Blandings. If we had had more time, we could have done Madeline Bassett, we could have done Sir Roderick Glossop, and possibly even the Empress of Blandings. These are three we voted out, so I feel justified in leaving out their brief introductions also. But before we start with the reflections, I'm delighted to invite our guest speaker onto the Zoom stage, Sunil Agarwal. Many of you know Sunil primarily from his IIT Delhi days. He keeps referring to Thrivi, Vineet, Ambuj in his conversations with me. But a few will also remember him from his IIM Ahmedabad days. And many, of course, have followed his career as a well-loved comedy writer. He now contributes daily, excepting on Sundays, on the front page of the Times of India, where he has co-created and published over 1,500 cartoons since 2015. His recent publications include cartoons on ChatGPT, on the COVID lockdown, and on the WhatsApp jungle. Sunil has been awarded for outstanding contribution to media by the IIT Delhi Alumni Association. To say the least, Sunil is funny. Seriously. He will center his talk today on what it's like to be a humorist, his learnings over the past 10 years. And then he will speak to us around some of his Crazy Bosses cartoons, a series that I love. And he's been very kind to share a copy of his book with all of us. So thank you for joining us today, Sunil. Thank you all for your time, guys. Let's get the ball rolling with Yanks and Milind. Thanks.
Thank you, Gautam. Sunil is obviously very excited to come and talk with all of us because just before the session began, he said, "You've given me 15 minutes, but I want 20." So I'm happy that he's going to talk for 20 minutes. So go ahead, Sunil.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, firstly, I have more friends in your batch, many of them over here right now on the call, than I have in IIM Ahmedabad. And just to give you an idea, well, specifically, I've got Vineet Taneja, Ambuj Kalra, Kenneth D'Souza, Shankar Trivedi. And just to give you an idea of closeness that we developed, I mean, I've literally spent thousands of hours with each one of them alone. So, for example, closeness. Now, Shankar Trivedi, once I was flying in 1986 from New York to India, and I decided to take a stopover in London for 2 days to be with Shankar. The plane, because of the fog, got diverted to Brussels, and it was there for 12 hours. When I landed in Heathrow without cell phones, Shankar was standing there at the exit with 2 packs of cigarettes. 12 hours. That's the extent of friendships you form in the IIT. Thank you, Shankar. Okay, now what I'm going to tell you is, see, firstly, there are you can find everything on the internet and ChatGPT. So I'm not going to talk about that. So what I'm going to talk about, you're not going to find on the internet. Firstly, see, I was doing well, pretty successful with the Times of India when I went to my friend Geet Sethi, the 7 times world billiards champion. And I said, Geet, I'm good. How do I get to be great? So he looked at me, he's very close. So he said, you'll never be great. Now, that's not what you want to hear from your friend. And then he added, see, you're a damn comfort seeker. To you, you'll think 10 times, fly economy class or not. You'll be deciding about which brand of single malt. He says, you're too much of a comfort seeker. The second thing is that you place too much of value on relationships. You'll attend every marriage, everybody's son's marriage, every funeral. And the third thing is that, look, to become great, you need to spend a lifetime. You don't do it just hanging around and spend 10 years, which I've done. So in 10 years, you don't become great. So these were the 3 things that he told me. Anyway, then I had a comedy guru in the US. He's met thousands and thousands of comedy writers in his life. So once I was talking to him during one of the tuitions, and I asked him, stuff about comedians. He said one thing all comedians everywhere in the world have in common. Everybody. They've had a traumatic childhood. So comedy is a way of learning to cope with the world. They can't. They create their worlds so that they can live in them and just feel, the warmth, the safety, the love. They just immerse themselves in that world. So, by the way, I've just created the crazy bosses world. Maybe that's also one of the things that I wanted to do. So, let me tell you about what is trauma. So trauma is not that a dog bites you when you're young or something. See, trauma is now, I went to boarding school at the age of 4. And the only physical touch I got over there was when the bearers, they used to give you a bath. And, it was very lonely. Now, okay. Then I moved to live with my granny and aunt and uncle in Allahabad. See, they were very loving, very caring, the most caring people in the world. But see, the difference between an aunt and a mother is this. See, when you really feel like crying, you can't bury your head in somebody's sari and cry. So that's the difference. And you need that human touch. You need to share your vulnerability. Now, I was beaten up in school, and the reason I was beaten up in school was that I was one head shorter than everybody else. So anybody in a bad mood would come and beat me up. I had zero friends in schools, absolutely zero. So when I got into the IIT, I had only one goal, just one goal, and that was to make friends. So I landed up in the IIT, and in my double room in Aravali hostel, a huge room. Now they seat 3 people in that room. I'm not joking. You have to see those rooms. 3 people in one double room. So I land up over there, and my roommate happens to be Hari Bhartia. He owns Domino's, Shomino's, and all. So he first day he landed up, said bye, and he started living in his house in Vasant Vihar. I got damn bugged, and I went and complained to the warden. I said, "Look, this is very unfair. I land up, and where's my roommate? He's gone away. He's gone to live somewhere else. Give me a roommate." Now imagine I have a double room to myself, which means it has, I don't know if you've seen the double rooms in Aravali or any of the hostels. And I tell them, look, stuff it up with one more person. So he gave me a roommate. Now, that roommate, now I was totally inexperienced in social skills, totally inexperienced. I was socially awkward and I just didn't know what it takes to make friends. So after some time, he left because he found me a little bit of a pain. So he left. Then I took on another person. Then I felt that he was not right for me. He was not my ideal of a friend. So I threw him out and I complained because that. Then I got somebody else. So this seesaw kept on happening. Either somebody threw me out or I threw them out. And I promise you, I mean, some people from the IIT Delhi are here. I had 8 roommates in the first year. 8. I felt like Elizabeth Taylor or something. See, because I just didn't know how to make friends. I was too anxious to make friends. It's just that's the only thing I wanted. The other thing I wanted was popularity. So it was a huge thing for me to stand in the elections. Now they have hundreds of elections over there in the IIT. And I finally won an election for the common room secretary, which was one of the 40 elections in the hostels. And the newspapers used to come to my room. And I was very thrilled that at last I'm popular. But, it was very, very important to me to be popular. I seldom went to class till they had the attendance rule. And when I went there, it's really embarrassing. It's really painful. Sitting in class, all you want to do is make friends, and you have to watch somebody solve differential equations. So it was pathetic. It was torture. So somehow I figured out how to get attendance while staying in the billiards room. And Shankar Trivedi and I, literally, I was counting the other day, spent 3,000 hours together playing billiards in those 5 years. Well, Shankar played more because he was there for a bit longer. Because, see, we had Kenneth D'Souza, who probably is here. Kenneth D'Souza was in my class. Now, I didn't go to class. Kenneth didn't go to class. And Kenneth was, I think, the only one in class who got worse grades than me. He was at the bottom of the class. I
Thank
don't
you.
think anybody was Huh? Yeah, Kenneth. No, see, everything that I say to you is absolutely true, and you're there. So Kenneth didn't go to class, but the difference between Kenneth and Shankar, who was even worse, Shankar was even worse than Kenneth. The difference was Kenneth didn't go to class. Shankar didn't go for the test. So they had to fail him. You see, they didn't have an option because normally in the IIT, they chuck everybody out because they've got new people coming in. But he didn't go for the test. So he took 7 years. I think he topped your batch or something and he's doing pretty well. So obviously, it's not connected to innate ability. Something happens to you when you are a teenager. It's difficult to cope. In my case, it was more difficult to cope because I went to boarding school at the age of 4. See, it's different going to go boarding school at the age of 4 versus going at the age of 8. For example, at the age of 8, you realize that when the PT teacher touches you, it's not on. So, and it's different. I'm sorry, at the age of 4, at the age of 8, you know that it's inappropriate. So, those are the things you have to suffer at the age of 4, 5, 6. So, then,
Sunil,
yeah,
just want to let you know you have only 10 more minutes to go.
sure. Okay. So, then I'll skip. So I realized that all I was seeking was validation, approval, attention, to be able to tell myself, see, I always thought I didn't have friends because I was a nobody. I was unremarkable. So I thought that, look, I should not be a nobody. And to do that, I wanted that validation, and I've always sought that validation from others. I've lived for the validation of others throughout my life. The other thing is that I wanted to connect, and I badly wanted and needed to connect. This need for connection became innate in me, it became part of me. Everything that I did in my jobs, I started a magazine, I was the first editor. Then I wrote books and kept giving lectures in school assemblies. I started a public relations company where the main thing is you have to have client relations, you have to have people relations. So everything was about relationships. So that's how desperate I was, and that is what my nature is, to be able to, sorry, to want to relate. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that I can bet you every comedy writer, whether he's good, whether he's great, will have this as an innate burning need, an urge, and that is a need to connect. Okay. And comedy is their root because they can't connect themselves, they're too bad. And so that is what I did. Now, I told you, I'm good, I'm not great, I'll never be great. So let me talk about somebody who was great. My partner, ex-partner, Ajit Nainan, he was great. So what makes a person great and what is the sign of a great person? See, he lived the art. He just lived it. There was nothing else in his life. In the 5 years of exchanging 5,000 mails with him and living with him literally, not once did he tell me about his family. I just met them in passing. Later, I came to know that his daughter, I used to ask him, what do they do in Goa? I mean, he says they make gin. Later, I came to know that she had started Hapusa Gin and Stranger and Son or something. And these are the most successful brands today that have been started in the last 10 years. But it just either skipped his mind or he didn't know or he didn't care. What he cared about was when he got into a plane, he would make 3D perspectives of the interiors of a plane. And see, he saw the world from the eyes of an outsider looking in. To him, the world was a 3D model which he had to, I don't know. So he breathed his identity. To him, his cartoons were his identity. It was him. You separate his cartoons, just by the way, they stopped his cartoons when he was about 67, 68. He died at the age of 69. Was there a connection? I don't know. He just died. And I think there was a connection because they took his innate self away from him. He felt alone. See, all comedy writers are loners. They feel alone. They feel lonely. I'll tell you again about Ajit Naina. So at one time, he and I didn't get along for 5 months. He hated me. He used to pick up the phone and abuse me. And why? Because once he stopped doing the cartoons, and I said, "Listen, you better do the cartoons. We'll get kicked out or whatever." He said, "Screw you. I'm not doing the cartoons." Various reasons, because see, when you're successful, there is jealousy. There is, people say all sorts of things. Like he had other cartoonists telling him, "Look, your contribution is so much," which is true, and he gets the credit, which is true. So there was a lot of animosity. And in the process, he actually hated me. He used to abuse me, etc., etc. He used to then on his 65th birthday, he called his friends and family. And this is a time when he hates me. Huh? So he called his family, and I go there, and there is one friend, and that's me. That's how lonely people become. He didn't have anybody else to call.
Mhm.
Now, that is what Geet Sethi meant when he said, "You'll never be great." See, it has to be your identity. You can't just say, "I must do it." See, in my case, I was good because I had a hunger. I was starving for connection. But that's very different from being great. It is them. So, with that, I don't think we have any more time because do we have more time or no?
If you want to talk to us at the end again, there is
Well,
plenty of time
okay,
there.
because I have
But
too much. I
we
have too
can
much to
use
say, but forget it.
no.
So, thank you.
We can spend a couple of minutes. Sunil, you spoke very beautifully. Um, if somebody has a question for Sunil, please go ahead. We have time for
I'll just end with one thing.
yeah.
I'm sure somebody is speaking, I think, on PG Woodhouse's early life. I'm saying, please do. And I can guarantee, I can bet anything that his life would have been similar. In
Mhm.
whatever way, they're all similar. Sure, he's a genius, right? I mean, I'm only good. So there's a difference between somebody who writes for joy, it gives him great joy, then somebody who becomes a sort of a professional. That's me. So you have to be good. Then you have to be great, which is at the level of Ajit Naina. And then you need to be a genius. And I was reading one of his books. I've got Blanding's Castle over here. And in the preface, P.G. Woodhouse, in the first para of the preface, I have the book lying around over here, but we don't have time for me to read it. It says, "I got addicted. I just wanted to create and create. I wanted to see the characters evolve." And that's how the characters evolved. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Sunil. That was very rewarding.
Thank you.
And I hope you stay throughout the session so
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you are.
of course I'm here. Of course I'm here. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for
Terrific.
having me.
You're very welcome.
I was supposed to talk about crazy bosses and etc., but I don't have time for that.
We've already seen your cartoons, 106 of them.
No,
Yes.
I was supposed to talk about how a comedian, how a comic writer develops a character. You know, everybody develops a character. If I can take half a second, see, all of us baby boomers, successful, have one thing in common. See, we've all come up in an era where academic excellence through hard work, a competitive thing, was essential. There was no other place to go. We all came from a time when we had to suffer authority. You go home, there is parental authority. You go to school, college, there is teacher authority. You join work, there is boss authority. So there's a lot of, pressure. There's a lot of, so when people become bosses, part of it is, कि अब मेरी बारी आई. Now I'll show you. Then everybody is seen or heard of or whatever bosses that who are manipulative, who are paranoid, who are narcissistic, who are bullies. So in that sense, the timing for this character, Crazy Bosses, had come. The rest is how I made it, but I can't talk about it right now in the interest of time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sunil, again.
Thank you very
We
much.
all enjoyed the time you've spent with us, and I'm glad you'll be here till the end. So, on my part, I just want to say it's really a delight to come back to the pure and unadulterated joy of Woodhouseian humor. And this has happened because of Gautam's idea of reintroducing him to our book club after many, many years of absence for me. So it's like a breath of fresh air. Now, in the bargain, Gautam has gone ahead and organized a mini battalion of reflectors. And the first two of these reflectors, Gautam and Ishan, as he said, are going to give us a bio sketch of P.G. Wodehouse as well as indulge us in the turn of phrase that we all enjoyed in his writing. So I won't interrupt Abdul and Ishan, they'll go one after the other. Go ahead, Abdul.
Thank you, Milind. Most of us grew up on a steady diet of Wodehouse's books in our teenage years and subsequently into our 20s. Even later, many of us, including myself, have gone back and have read and reread his books to relive our past. The many characters he created, like Bertie, Jeeves, Gussie Fignotle, Bobby Wickham, Smith, Mulliner, Aunt Agatha, Euclid, Lord Emsworth, they're all very vividly familiar to us. But most of us have known very little about the man behind these characters. In fact, we have always had a certain professional distance with Wodehouse and were most of the time not even sure of his first name. Pelham Grenville Wodehouse was born in 1881 as the third son of a British magistrate in Hong Kong. Most likely because Pelham is a rather unusual name, he was called Plum by his family and friends. Throughout his childhood, he was passed around from one aunt to another and then to boarding schools, and he had little contact with his parents. No wonder his books are populated by aunts who inspire mostly awe and occasionally affection. The lack of parental bonding, however, left an emotional scar in him, causing him to avoid emotional engagements. He spent the happiest years of his youth as a student at Dulwich College in 1890s. He was planning to go to Oxford for his higher studies, but had to drop the plan because of financial reasons. His father's pension was paid in rupees, and the value of the rupee declined, making for college impossible. He started his career with HSBC in 1900 at the age of 19. He thoroughly disliked banking and started writing in his spare time. Although his first book, The Plot Hunters, was published in 1902, it was a rather unremarkable book. In 1904, he moved to the US, where he spent most of the rest of his life. It's a little puzzling that although he spent a good part of his life in the US, most of his stories are set in England, and most of his characters were upper-class Englishmen and women, a class that he did not belong to. Similarly, it's an enduring puzzle that his books are not particularly popular in the US, either because the rural upper-class British settings were unfamiliar to Americans, or because his very British turns of phrase and his subtle sense of humor did not register on an audience that equated humor with slapstick. Wodehouse was a man of many parts, and most of us have only a one-dimensional view of him based on his humorous novels and stories. After he moved to the US, for the next many years, he wrote over 40 plays, some based on his novels. His musicals, including A Gentleman of Leisure, were very successful on Broadway. For a while, he worked for MGM in Hollywood and did the script for several movies. His output was prodigious and prolific. More than 90 novels, 200 short stories, 40 plays, and much more. Clearly, the author of A Gentleman of Leisure did not have much leisure. On an average, it took him 3 months to 6 months to finish a book. Wodehouse was a man who liked to avoid controversies, but unfortunately, no one escapes them. Wodehouse had moved to France in the early 1930s, mainly for tax reasons. In 1940, when Germany invaded France, he stayed on, thinking that the German occupation would be short-lived, and also because he did not want to put his dog through British quarantine. He spent nearly a year in a series of civil internment camps. During this ordeal, he lost 60 pounds, and when he was finally offered a room, due to his fame, he refused, sharing a cell with 63 others and slept on straw. After his release, he made 5 radio broadcasts, which were light-hearted descriptions of his life in prison. However, the reaction in England was furious. He was accused of being a German collaborator, and the BBC banned him. He was deeply hurt by the criticism and never returned to England till his death in New York at the age of 93. The largest audience for Wodehouse's books is surprisingly in India, although India rarely figures in any of his books except in passing. Obviously, the question is, what appeals is explained to Indians? Vikram Doraisamy, India's current High Commissioner to UK, provides several interesting explanations for this rather intriguing cultural and literary phenomenon. First, in India, where we were consumed by the never-ending soap opera of politics, Wodehouse constructs a world that is completely apolitical. Although the 2 world wars, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Great Depression, etc., occurred during the peak of his career, the world he describes is inhabited by amiable idiots and imperious aunts and lively young women. Second, we are familiar with figures like Birbal and Tenali Raman, the subordinates who were smarter than their masters, but who still serve their masters while recognizing their intellectual limitations. Third, we are a sentimental people who never get tired of sentimental stories. Most Bollywood stories are not only sentimental, but variations on a limited set of themes. So are Wodehouse stories. Or perhaps, as Malcolm Muggeridge was put it, the last Englishmen left in the world are Indians. Thank you.
Very nice. Abdul, it's a delight to get to know the man behind all his writings that we have enjoyed from an intellectual like you who's done good research to tell us so much that we did not know about him. Thank you. So let's move on to Ishan for turn of phrase in Wodehouse. Go ahead, Ishan.
Hi. So Wodehouse, especially his characters Jeeves and Bertie Wooster, had an outsized influence on me and my group at SRCC at Shriram during the mid to late 70s. I guess it was same equally true of St. Stephen's and the debating cultural kind of crowd. My brief today was to explore and analyze turn of phrase. I've looked at these terms and phrases that became part of the lexicon amongst the debating and dramatics group in Delhi University in those days. The only other author whose turn of phrase entered our lexicon was Joseph Heller's Catch-22. So what hope, repeated between 2 and 3 times, was a standard greeting. We all had our personal Jeeves, basically a bright young fresher chosen from the group during ragging, who was educated with the Jeeves omnibus and trained to be unflappable, intellectually superior gentleman's gentleman. We reminded ourselves that when the voice of love called us, it was a wrong number. We discussed people we didn't like or appreciate and agreed that they had enough intelligence to open their mouth when they wanted to eat, but certainly no more. We told our friends that the girl they liked had enough brains for 2, which was the exact amount any girl who married them would need. And some other classic put downs. Don't talk rot. I'm not accustomed to talking rot. Then for a beginner, you do it dash well. If he had a mind, there was something on it. He looked as if he had been poured into his clothes and forgotten to say when. If not actually disgruntled, he was far from being gruntled. That's what Gautam referred to earlier. The irony of most of us walking around pretending to be affable, idle, rich people of minimal intelligence when we had no money in our pockets was completely lost to us. That was the magic of P.G. Wodehouse and the world that he created across his books and characters. Amongst our batchmates, I feel Bobby Saldana, rest in peace, was the one person who would make a perfect Bertie Wooster if I was to direct a Wodehouse play. I can quite hear him say, there are moments, Jeeves, when one asks oneself, do trousers matter? And the perfect response, the mood will pass, sir.
Thank you, Ishan. Bringing Bobby into the picture gave us a very good idea of what Jeeves and Bertie Wooster would have been in combination. Thank you. So with that, we go to the talented foursome who are going to be engaging, reflecting, and perhaps also enacting unforgettable Woodhouseian characters. Kenny on Jeeves, Arvind on Bertie Wooster, Maurice on Aunt Agatha, and Abhay on Lord Emsworth. I won't dare to interrupt them because once they get going, God help anyone getting in their way. So go, Kenny.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. So I'll start right at the beginning. And so I'm supposed to talk about Jeeves. So I'll give a brief kind of recap. To quote Stephen Fry, actually, he said, like Wodehouse, Jeeves stands alone and any analysis ultimately is useless. Jeeves is a valet, not a butler. Though when he occasionally has to take on the role of a butler, as Bertie Wooster proudly claims, he can buttle with the best. In Dorothy Sayers' crime stories, her aristocratic sleuth, I think some of you must be familiar with Lord Peter Wimsey, the books as well as the movies. He has an indispensable valet named Bunter, who's probably used to win the war with him. He plays a key role in solving the crimes, but he's more of a talented, polished leg man. Lord Wimsey is the guy with a sharp intellect. So in my mind, I think Dorothy Sayers also picked Bunter. Bunter was probably inspired by the Jeeves character. So Jeeves came earlier. P.G. Wodehouse predates Dorothy L. Sayers, and by a few years. And but Dorothy, she kind of made a switch. She sent the intellect towards Lord Peter Wimsey, but she gave it to Jeeves the butler rather than to Bertie Wooster, the aristocrat. So can we move on? Yeah. So this, I mean, there are similar anecdotes about that. People have analyzed, that Sherlock Holmes and Jeeves are the great big brains, while Watson and Bertie are the odd companion narrators, bungling things if they try to solve the problems themselves. Another critic also commented that both Watson and Wooster, Watson is the narrator, Wooster is the narrator, seems to know less than the reader, whereas this creates the pleasure of being the cleverer sleuth for the reader of the detective novels. In the case of Jeeves and Wooster novels, they delight in getting the joke first or in foreseeing events that are about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Fry noted that uniquely within the P.G. Wodehouse oeuvre, all the Jeeves stories are narrated not by an anonymous narrator, but indeed by Bertie Wooster himself. I think most of us would have noticed that. So everything we know about Jeeves' character is at first hand through Bertie's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
This actually reveals the skill and intellect on Bertie's part that belies his self-deprecatory manner, especially so in his frequent allusion to classical literature and poetry. Obviously, Bertie has had a good education. So these are often half-stated, and all that, he says, or they're tossed off flippantly or required to be completed by Jeeves delving into his memory. So, for example, perhaps Gautam, would you like to help me out in this?
Sure.
Kenny,
Stream of dialogue?
you have 1 more minute, Kenny.
Yeah, we'll just do this little. You'll have to give me another minute. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll be Bertie, Gautam, you be Jeeves, right?
Sure.
So do you recall telling me once about someone who told somebody that he could tell him something that would make him think a bit? Knitted socks and porcupines entered into it, I remember.
I think you may be referring to the ghost of the father of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, sir. Addressing his son, he said, I could a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul. Freeze thy young blood, make thy two eyes like stars, start from their spheres, thy knotted and combined locks to part, and each particular hair to stand on end like quills upon the fretful porpentine.
That's right. Locks, of course, not socks. Odd that he should have said porpentine when he meant porcupine. Slip of the tongue, no doubt, as so often happens with ghosts. And Jeeves stands guard actually to keep Bertie from knowing too much, sometimes interfering in his affairs to keep him from certain parts of reading. So relevant to us because we are voracious readers. We read everything. We need someone like Jeeves to protect us from some of the books we read. So here's Jeeves explaining why he brought about an end to Bertie's engagement to Miss Florence Gray. I've had it from a lady's own maid that it was her intention to start you almost immediately upon Nietzsche. You would not enjoy Nietzsche, sir. He's fundamentally unsound. So then I'll skip this pick me up. A couple of things about his club. But the one trivia is that Bertie Wooster learns Jeeves' name when he hears another valet greeting Jeeves with a hello, Reggie. The readers may have been surprised to learn Jeeves' first name, but Bertie was stunned by the revelation that he had a first name in the first place. So Wodehouse overall wrote 35 stories, short stories, 11 novels featuring Jeeves. I could recommend some must-reads which are like the titles are given there. But I would suggest that you pick up any of the omnibus volumes which are there, and collections of shorts, so just start reading. Yeah, they're all good. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kenny. And that was wonderful between you and Gautam. So we just need to keep to time. So let's move on to Arvind with Bertie Wooster.
Superb, Kenny.
Thank you, Milan. And morning, everyone. Bertie's real name is Bertram Wilberforce Wooster, and he is a fictional character created by P.G. Wodehouse, an amiable English gentleman and one of the idle rich. Bertie appears alongside his valet Jeeves, whose intelligence manages to save Bertie or one of his friends from numerous awkward situations. It is believed John Wodehouse be the inspiration of Bertie. PG was a distant cousin of John and also godfather to his son. In his early life, about his early life, Bertie and his friend Bingo Riddle were born in the same village only a few days apart. Bertie's middle name, Wilberforce, is the doing of his father, who won money on a horse named Wilberforce and insisted on his son carrying that name. When he was around 7 years of age, Bertie was sometimes compelled to recite the charge of the Light Brigade for guests by his mother. He also mentions reciting other poems as a child, including Ben Battle and works by Walter Scott. His mother thought him intelligent, but Bertie states that he and the others found the experience unpleasant. When Bertie was 8, he took dancing lessons alongside Corky Potter Purbright, sister of Bertie's friend Catsmead Potter Purbright. It is established throughout the series that Bertie is an orphan who inherited a large fortune at some point, although the exact details and timing of his parents' death are never made clear. His early education took place at the semi-fictional Malvern House Preparatory School, headed by Reverend Aubrey Upjohn. At school, Bertie's friends called him Daredevil Bertie, though Upjohn and others called him Bungling Wooster. At school, he also won a prize for scripture knowledge. Bertie speaks with pride of his achievement on several occasions, but his friend Gussie, while intoxicated, publicly accuses Bertie of having won this award by cheating. Bertie stoutly denies this charge, however, and on the same occasion, Gussie makes other completely groundless accusations against other characters. Despite his pride over his accomplishment, Bertie does not remember precisely what the prize was, simply stating that it was a copy of devotional work whose name he doesn't remember. He is a member of the Drones Club. Most of his friends and fellow Drones members depicted in the stories attended one or both of these institutions with him. It was at Oxford that he first began celebrating the night of the annual boat race between Oxford and Cambridge. Though ordinarily he drinks in moderation, says he is rather apt to let myself go a bit on boat race nights, typically drinking more than usual and making mischief with his old school friends. Specifically, Bertie and others tend to celebrate the occasion by stealing a policeman's helmet, though often they get arrested as a result. London magistrates are aware of this tradition and tend to be lenient towards Bertie when he appears in court the morning after the boat race night, generally only imposing a fine of £5. While this would have caused a significant amount of money for many people at that time, Bertie had no trouble paying it. Bertie is usually the narrator in the novels, and most of them are with Jeeves, who he hired in Jeeves Takes Charge. Bertie and Jeeves have been described as one of the great comic double acts of all times. Bertie and Jeeves lived at Berkeley mansions, though they also go to New York and numerous English country homes. Usually, Bertie tries to help his friends and relatives, but ends up becoming entangled himself and is ultimately rescued by Jeeves. Typically, Bertie has a new piece of clothing or item, like a vase or a painting, that Jeeves disapproves of, though Bertie agrees to relinquish it at the end of the story. Bertie is pleasant and
Arvind, just take 2 more minutes, okay?
yeah.
Thank you.
Bertie is pleasant and amiable, a well-intentioned and honorable young gentleman. He has a strong moral code and prides himself on helping his friends. He is not snobbish to servants and is not bothered when one of his pals wants to marry someone from a different social class. He gladly spends time with a variety of people, including rich aristocrats and poor artists. He is unworldly and naive. He is not interested in global affairs or politics and advises Jeeves to miss as many political debates as possible in order to live a happy and prosperous life. Usually modest about his intelligence, but he states, I know perfectly well that I've got, roughly speaking, half the amount of brain a normal bloke ought to possess. Sometimes Bertie acts diffidently, giving in to the whims of his formidable aunts or fiancées, but there is also times when he displays a strong will. For example, when he attempts to defy Jeeves' wishes on clothing, or when he resolves to confront Aunt Agatha. By no means an ambitious man, but he seeks neither a prestigious job nor a socially advantageous marriage. In his own words, Bertie is the sort of person who is content to just exist beautifully. He likes swimming, plays tennis and golf, handicap 18. He plays squash and was runner-up in 1 year in the Drones Club annual squash handicap. His major relationships are with the families of Aunt Agatha Gregson and Aunt Dahlia Travers. The Gregson family consists of Spencer, Thomas, Lord Walpole Dunn, Florence Trey, and Edwin Trey. The Travers family consists of Tom, Angela, Bonzo, and George. The Wooster family has Henry, George, Maud, Claude, and Harold. Bertie never marries, but frequently finds himself engaged. Ladies, Mendel Burry, Florence Cray, Pauline Stoker, Bobby Wickham, Madeline Bassett, and Honoria Glossop are the more prominent names that appear. Jeeves frequently rescues Bertie from unwanted engagements. Among Bertie's friends are Bongo Little Gussie, Harold Pinker, also called the Stinker, Oliver Sipperley, Rock Metler, Todd, and Claude Potter Purbright. Major adversaries are Sir Watkin Bassett, Sir Roderick Glossop, who later becomes a friend, and the intimidating Roderick Spode. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Arvind, for a very comprehensive and enjoyable reflection on Bertie Wooster. So with that, we move on to Aunt Agatha in Marie's capable hands. Go ahead, Maurice.
I was introduced to P.G. Wodehouse by my father, who loved the phrases and would often quote and highlight a story to me. I remember going into the library and finding the place where all of the titles were listed and systematically going through each book and the short stories and loving the turn of phrase. So when I was asked to be the ROM for this, it just sounded like an ideal way to spend my time to go back and glimpse into the characters in a little more depth. Aunt Agatha is one of the primary characters because she juxtaposes so well against Bertie Wooster's character that she really brings it to life. I found a few quotes from the book, and I thought the best way to bring it to life is for you to hear those quotes. So the first one is 7 words that best describe Aunt Agatha, which is, she sprang it on me before breakfast. And so here's the clip which goes to show that one.
She sprang it on me before breakfast. There, in 7 words, you have a complete character sketch of my Aunt Agatha. I could go on indefinitely about brutality and lack of consideration. I merely say that she routed me out of bed to listen to her painful story somewhere in the small hours. It can't have been 11:30 when Jeeves, my man, woke me out of the dreamless and broke the news. Mrs. Gregson to see you, sir.
So that tells you that for Aunt Agatha, what was early morning was very, very different from what was early morning for Bertie Wooster. And I guess as we think back, I wonder how many of us would have a similar view on the differences in early morning. The next quote that I'll highlight is a description of Aunt Agatha as a strong-minded woman who bosses everyone around her. And it brings out the aspect, I think, that made Bertie fear her the most.
Staring into space. When I came in, she looked at me with that darn critical way that always makes me feel as if I had gelatin where my spine ought to be. Aunt Agatha is one of those strong-minded women. I should think Queen Elizabeth must have been something like her. She bosses her husband, Spencer Gregson, a battered little chappie on the stock exchange. She bosses my cousin, Gussie Mannering Phipps. She bosses her sister-in-law, Gussie's mother, and worst of all, she bosses me.
So you can see how that all comes together. And finally, let me show you another one, which I think is a great example of P.G. Woodhouse's turn of phrase, which is a comparison of Aunt Agatha to the Spanish Inquisition.
To a fine point. I dare say there are fellows in the world, men of blood and iron, don't you know, and all that sort of thing, whom she couldn't intimidate. But if you're a chappie like me, fond of a quiet life, you simply curl into a ball when you see her coming and hope for the best. My experience is that when Aunt Agatha wants you to do a thing, you do it. Or else you find yourself wondering why those fellows in the olden days made such a fuss when they had trouble with the Spanish Inquisition.
So there you have some glimpses at Aunt Agatha and how Bertie Wooster saw her. Thanks.
So there's some additional bonus things I put together, which actually connect well with what Sunil and Abdul told us about the aunts and being passed from one to the other. So here's some comments, and I'll just go through the bottom 2, which was his comparison between the two, where he says, I was looking forward with bright anticipation to the coming reunion with this Dahlia. She, as I may have mentioned, being my good and deserving aunt, not to be confused with Aunt Agatha, who eats broken bottles and wears barbed wire next to the skin. And the other one, which was Dahlia, my good and deserving aunt, not to be confused with Aunt Agatha, the one who kills rats with her teeth and devours her young. I hope his childhood was not that bad, but maybe it was. So with that, I'll pass it on.
Great. Thank you, Maurice. Really delightful. So let's move on to Abhay, who's going to bring in a little bit of theatre to present Lord Emsworth. Go ahead, Abhay.
Thank you. Thank you. Truly delightful so far. So since time is short, let's get on to the picture. Here you see Lord Emsworth. Next slide, please. Yeah, you see Lord Emsworth on your right with his famous pumpkin, and they say a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. Of course, you can see Mr. Beach, the butler, handing him over the hat. Next slide, please. Lord Emsworth, he's an English aristocrat, amiable but absent minded man, described as being capable of but one thought at a time. With little else to do around the castle, Emsworth primarily concerns himself with trivial and simplistic pastimes and passions such as playing with gadgets or fretting over his prized pumpkin. Represents the aimless nobility with the lack of meaningful responsibility of those times, which have become somewhat irrelevant in modern times. Traditional at heart, he takes pride in his heritage. He was completely happy as only a fluffy minded old man with excellent health and a large income can be. I'm copying from Mr. Woodhouse, of course. Emsworth, he's the ninth proprietor of Blandings Castle. He loves to potter around in his garden and devote himself to his prized pig, the Empress of Blandings. He hates London, only desires to be left in peace amid perpetually summery castle gardens at Blandings. Has a tendency to pocket things not because of any kleptomaniacal afflictions, but simply being absent minded. And let's read a few lines of his conversation with Adams, who's the head steward at the Senior Conservatives Club in London, where Lord Emsworth lands up for a morning snack. So here's Lord Emsworth sitting at a table in the dining hall of the club having a conversation with Adams, the head steward. Adams, don't often see your lordship in the club. Lord, no, Adam, I seldom visit London nowadays. The country, the fields, the woods, the birds. His voice trails off. Lord is distracted with something across the room. And then once he finally comes back to the conversation, Lord, what was I saying, Adams? Adams, the birds, your lordship. Birds? What birds? What about birds? You were speaking of the attractions of the countryside, your lordship. You included birds in your remark. Ah, yes, 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 of course, to be sure. Do you ever go to the country, Adams? Generally to the seashore, your lordship, when I take my annual vacation. And by this time, whatever was distracting the Lord across the room continued to do so, and the Lord fades off again in his thoughts, and then comes back again. The Lord. What were you saying, Adams? Adams. I said that I generally went to the seashore, your lordship. When? For my annual vacation, your lordship. Your what? My annual vacation, your lordship. So what about it? So there you are. How balmy can a guy get? Let's go on. Sometime later, almost finishing his meal, Lord abruptly gets up and seemingly in a hurry for an appointment. Lord, I remember that I have an appointment. I must not be late. Adams, shall I take the fork, your lordship? The fork? Your lordship has inadvertently put a fork in your coat pocket. Lord M felt in his pocket and, with the air of an expert conjurer, produced a silver plated fork. Lord, Adams, I'm getting absent minded. Have you ever noticed any traces of absent mindedness in me before? Oh, no, 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 your lordship. And as Lord M left, Adam gazed at the slow moving figure with reverence and thought to himself, what a nut. So Lord Clarence Threepwood was his full name, was first introduced by Woodhouse in Something Fresh in 1915. Lord Emsworth is invariably called upon to save the day, either to rescue his dim-witted son Freddie, or to thwart pig thieves to enable young lovers, or to enable young lovers to achieve wedded bliss. Frequently harassed by his snobbish sisters, we heard about them from Maurice, relies mostly on his estate's head gardener, McClister, and Mr. Beach, the butler, and Rupert Baxter, his secretary. Just a line on Mr. Beach. Blandings Castle was one of the more important of England's showplaces, and Beach, accordingly, had acquired a dignified inertia which almost qualified him for the inclusion in the vegetable kingdom. There's a picture of the Lord.
Abhay, take 1 more minute.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Next one, please. Next slide. So we can't end without a word on Freddie. Honorable Freddie is Emsworth's son, a typical English aristocrat and not up to any good. Honorable Freddie, the younger son, had always annoyed his father. The Earl of Emsworth was so constituted that no man or thing really had the power to trouble him deeply, but Freddie had come nearer to doing that than anybody else in the world. Freddie had been expelled from Eton and several other places and had accumulated an almost record series of racing debts. The placid parent, Lord M, finally had to put his foot down. He stopped his son's allowance and brought him back to Blandings, where Freddie was found moping around. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abhay. That was really
Terrific.
remarkable
Very good.
theater.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you.
So coming back to earth, I don't know. Humor is a part of spirituality? Well, you decide after this little musing.
Humor and spirituality, two pillars on which we can rest our entire life. Eine kleine Nacht musing, or little night musing. The humor and spirituality connection quickly became apparent when I realized that I behave as if I'm immortal, while knowing that I'm not. That I am capable as a human being of thinking, speaking, and acting limitlessly when I am irreparably limited. I behave as if I matter, even though my mind is not matter. So what's the matter? Never mind. So even that little gimmicky humor comes out of thinking about my existence. Who am I? And why am I here? What am I doing here? And while rational mind thinks that these are deep, existential and spiritual questions, the monkey mind finds them humorous. But yet, we persist. The Gayatri Mantra, for example, places each one of us within the universe as our reference. And yet I know I'm as immaterial as can be. But when I think of man and what he has achieved, I like to bask in that reflected glory. Thinking about how far man has traveled, say 250,000 miles to the moon, and then I think, but how far has something man-made gone? Voyager 1, as of December 2024, is about 15 billion miles away from Earth and traveling in interstellar space. But I cannot really grasp this reality in any meaningful sense. So I turn to something simpler, an analogy for the solar system beyond which the Voyager has already gone. And even this analogy is what I read years ago in a book by Francis Crick of the Crick and Watson fame, entitled Life Itself, Its Origin and Nature. And even he used it as mentioned in the book by two astronomers, Robert Jastrow and Malcolm Thomson. Astronomy, Fundamentals and Frontiers. That's an astronomy textbook written for the liberal arts student. What a fine example of building a bridge between scientists and communities. So the analogy goes as follows. Let our sun be the size of an orange. On that scale, the earth is a grain of sand. circling in orbit around the Sun at a distance of 30 feet. Jupiter, 11 times larger than the Earth, is a cherry pit revolving at a distance of 200 feet, or about one city block from the Sun. Our entire galaxy on this scale is just about 100 billion oranges, give or take a few. Each orange separated from its neighbors by an average distance of about 1,000 miles. So on this scale, my little mind is blinking, but sort of calculates that if I'm here in Atlanta, the nearest star to this solar system is located somewhere in New York State, 1,000 miles away, which would be 250 miles north of New York City, and actually even 100 miles north of Albany, the capital of New York State. What a vast emptiness is this universe. By now, my spirituality has become just humor when I realize that on the grain of sand that we can call Earth, I'm nowhere to be found. So all these big things I imagine are one tiny corner in the universe, and I am really not in it. All that I really can cling on to make my journey meaningful then is humor.
Plain and simple. That can help me. So with that, let's get into an open discussion on humor, whichever way you'd like to go.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Milind.
Thank you.
Very deep. Nice. Can I just start by saying thank you to two non-club members who have taken the time to join us today. One is, of course, our own batchmate, Sunil Dugal. Thanks, Dugs, for joining. The other is my friend, Abhijit Yadav in Dubai, whose library I've been stealing all my PG Wodehouse books from. So thank you, Abhijit, both for the books and for spending time with us. Thank you.
Great having these two guests at our club. So who wants to begin?
Just a quick question.
Gautam.
Can anybody recommend other humorists from that era? The only one I can think of is Stephen Leacock.
Max Beerbaum.
Yeah, Max Beerbaum is very good. Yes. Yes.
Henry Cecil.
Mark Twain. Yeah. Henry Cecil also. Yeah, Cecil is very good. Yeah, Cecil. Yeah.
Abdul, Joseph Heller.
A little later. Yeah.
I haven't read it. It's a classic.
And Jerem K. Jerem. But
Jerem K. Jerem, correct. Three
Men on a Boat. Yeah,
Plus.
that's good.
Uncle Podger hangs a picture. That's we had that text in school, right? Uncle Podger hangs a picture.
Yes.
When was Billy Bunter?
Before the war, just around.
So about the same time.
It's so surprising.
Billy Bunter, yeah.
I've spoken to guys who are like in their 40s or 45-year-olds. They haven't heard of Billy Bunter. They don't know who he is.
What a tragedy.
What a tragedy, exactly.
What a tragedy.
Yeah.
William was that time.
William, yes,
yeah,
yes,
William.
absolutely,
Yeah.
William, yeah. Camp stories, yeah.
William the Conqueror, William the Great, William the First.
Listen, guys, I want to share one other thing which we've not touched upon, and that is how Wodehouse named his characters. You know, we've all heard Shakespeare, what's in a name, a rose by any other name. Not so P.G. Wodehouse, huh? His names were no accident. They were very well thought out. In fact, this was pointed out to me by Sunil. Thank you. Based on the work of a guy called Bob Mankoff, Sunil calls him the godfather of modern cartooning. He's been cartoons editor of the New York Magazine for 17 years. So Mankoff defines 3 elements, in naming people, characters. One is surprisal, the unexpected twist. Employ names that are unexpected in their sound combinations or juxtapositions. These combinations are inherently amusing and memorable, and I'll give you examples as we go on. The second point is iconicity. When the name fits the character, many P.G. Wodehouse names are iconic, meaning they subtly or not so subtly suggest something about the character's personality or role. And the third is emotional impact, tickling the funny bone. For example, the juxtaposition of Father Lord Emsworth with son Honorable Freddie Threepwood. If you look at a few examples of people and places, Bertie Wooster, he's an affable, dim-witted guy, and the name evokes a sense of upper-class twittishness. Aunt Agatha, Maurice's favorite aunt. Bertie's fearsome aunt, the name suggests a stern and imposing figure. Barmy Phipps, delightfully eccentric friend of Bertie, the name perfectly embodies his madness. Jeeves, the unflappable intellectual. The name itself suggests a quiet competence and subtle irony. Now that's names of characters. Look at names of places. Drones Club, a gentleman's club for Bertie and his pals. The name suggests idle laziness. Market Snodsbury, sleepy, unremarkable town. The name sounds dull and uninspired. Blanding's Castle, for that matter. Lord Emsworth's stately home. The name itself suggests bland dullness. And of course, the Empress of Blandings. I mean, the grand title is inherently funny given her species. She's a pig. Be nice to hear any comments on this.
You left out not Gotham, but Gussie Finknottle.
Gussie Finknottle.
Yes.
What an idiotic name. But,
and Peace
but
Smith,
it says
Peace,
it all.
Peace Island.
Yeah.
Left out Peace
That's
Smith.
what it gets. Is it Fink Whittle? The guy calls him the headmaster.
He also gets one confused for ink bottle, and Bertie has to send a telegram correcting that, saying it's Fink bottle and not ink bottle.
Is it the same guy who used to collect salamanders, newts?
Correct,
Newts.
Newts.
Even Anatole, the cook.
Yeah.
One question I had for all of you is, why is it that P.G. Wodehouse never became popular in the US or in any other country?
It's
really
Actually, he
surprising.
was popular because his Broadway show was a hit, right? So,
yeah, his humorous books were not popular because American concept of humor is very different. You may notice that Asterix and Obelix is not popular in the US at all. You won't even find it at a bookstore.
Yeah.
Because again, the kind of subtle humor that it projects, it just doesn't work in the US.
Yeah, and it's remarkable, like you said, Abdul, that he spent almost all his life in the US.
Correct.
But yet they don't know of his books.
Yeah.
He just created an alternative world, which I think appealed to the colonial mindset. And by then, America was out of the colonial mindset. You know, I mean, they were busy making money after the war. So
And also, I think his humor was pure goodness. I mean, he didn't have any evil, any kind of intention. Or,
interestingly,
all American humor survives on a bit of,
maybe they didn't understand his English.
Bite, yeah.
yeah.
I think
it is a different language, guys. Americans
maybe they didn't understand P.G. Wodehouse's English.
If Sunil is still with us, Sunil, what is your perspective on the sort of legacy he left? Because I think that a yes minister, yes prime minister, are really sort of created out of the world of sort of dithering idiots, which P.G. Wodehouse kind of initiated many years ago.
Ishan, I beg to differ. Actually, if you read about yes minister, yes prime minister, it's based on actual things from the bureaucracy in England. There was a mole, and the guys who wrote it, the script, had a mole there, and they used to get these. It was actually, no one can even, I mean, you can't make up these things, Absolutely. It applies to that particular series.
Wow.
Right. So, see, firstly, look at the timing. So, P.G. Wodehouse wrote somewhere between the two world wars and the economic crisis. So, at that time, people, I guess, especially in Britain, were looking for peace. And they were easily drawn into a make believe world. Frankly, I don't even know if anybody in the aristocracy over there spoke that language or had such a relationship with butlers. See, that's all what we like to believe. You know, it's like in Big Bang Theory, we like to believe that nerds behave in that manner. We like to believe that world. It brings us a lot of peace.
In fact, I have one more. I read it somewhere that most of us, many of us, feel when we read, when we scan P.G. Wodehouse writing story, we in our minds we can say it perfectly, and we say it so perfectly in our own minds that we are very dissatisfied with someone else reading or acting out the role. So that's one problem that we have. Each of us in our own mind we'll perfectly imitate the Lord Emsworth or Lord Beauchamp or
I thought Tanku and Maurice did really well, Kenny. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
No, but it's,
they read it
the thing
quite
is you're comparing it with what's happening in your own mind, so.
Yeah. One thing is the turn of phrase that he uses, and he's used it in humor in a lot of the cases we talked about. There's one book that I read of his, which was Death at the Excelsior, which is a mystery novel. And but what's interesting in that is that he uses that same sort of language where he uses phrases to draw a picture about the person, the fact that he was incapable, or that he was dull, or that he had no imagination. But I should have pulled out the phrases, I didn't. But he used that same type of language and phrase, but not for humor, but for description. And so I think there's something there, and I'm going to just make a broad brush statement, which is that love of the language and creating a picture and something you can imagine, which you don't find that much in the American humor.
In fact,
which is yeah.
Sorry. I'd
That's it.
like
No,
to add,
that was it.
I read somewhere that P.G. Wodehouse used to write all his works were written in longhand on paper, and he would make an average of like 100 corrections, cutting out scratches for each manuscript. I mean revisions. It was very painstakingly done. Each and every word was so you can't you try to replace one of the words he's used in that context. It's not possible. You just can't.
Yeah, I think P.G. Wodehouse, the main thing that differentiates him from the others is that, every writer paints a picture. I mean, when you're reading a book, you have a better picture than probably when you see a film. But P.G. Wodehouse combines it with humor and as well as a wonderful turn of phrase. I mean, anybody who's fond of English would just love just reading the English part of it. I mean, other than the story or the humor.
Yeah.
I
You know,
think
the
I think
pure
one interesting part of this is the point that came up, that the humor in appreciation of the humor in the US for this very British humor is less. And if you think about it, Tanku especially, look at the Enid Blytons and the Billy Bunters and all, those are also not popular in the US.
Yes, yes.
There's a certain genre of British writing or English writing, which the Indians tend to appreciate, maybe because of our education, etc., which seems to be missing. It came as a shock to me that people in the US, many young children hadn't seen Enid Blyton. Maurice, I think, was reflecting on that also.
Very true.
Yes.
Very true, Anjali.
Yeah, but
It's more
I wonder,
slapstick.
is P.G. Wodehouse, Enid Blyton, and the like, they're not popular in England either. It's basically the Indians who read all this stuff, and it's completely the opposite of what the British aristocracy is. Maybe that's why it appeals to Indians in particular. It helps us kind of feel that, oh, they're a bunch of bumbling idiots and, well-meaning bumbling idiots. I don't know. He's not particularly popular in England either.
If you think about it, maybe if you think about the 1900s, early 1900s, and the British impact in India, the number of things we were bringing in that were being brought in from the UK and, looked at, it would sort of say that may be why it had such a strong foothold. P.G. Wodehouse had such a strong foothold in India, and Enid Blyton and these other books, because these were the kind of things being brought in by the nuns and the schools at that time.
I'm confused. The man was knighted, wasn't he? He became a knight of the order, KBE. If
And
he
I think
didn't have appeal in the English, in England, how did he become a KBE?
no. So I think that today he may not be so popular, but I think at the time he was pretty popular. Otherwise, there's no way that he would have written 90 books or whatever.
I think he stopped being popular, I would say, from about
After
the
the war, right?
1980s onwards.
No, because
So I
remember
don't
what Nidhi, what Abdul, I think in his biography said, basically, because he was arrested and imprisoned in the war, and when he came out, he kind of like, said something about it. That's when he got pilloried in England.
Yeah.
After the war.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
he
thought he was
recorded
collaborating.
some speeches broadcast from the German radio.
Yeah.
There's a
But
book
that was
called Wodehouse.
earlier. That was much earlier, right? That would be right
No,
around
that was
after
during the
World
war.
War II.
42,
So
43.
yeah, so all his problems would have been maybe in the 40s and 50s. But like even in the 80s, 70s and 80s, when we people loved it in India, I don't think people in Britain were reading any of this
I
stuff.
don't think so, yeah. He was popular before the war in England.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, but there were BBC TV
There
serials
were,
on
yeah,
it. So, yeah.
now large number of BBC
Jeeves and Wooster was
serials,
super popular when I was.
ITV.
Yeah,
all of them. All
So
of
they
them.
may not have been reading the books, but there were TV serials about it.
In fact, there's a book called Wodehouse on Wodehouse. I think many of you might have read it. There's a collection of 3 books on him. There were really his whole war speeches are there in that. The speeches he made during the war. Very interesting. There's 3 books: Bring on the Girls, Performing Flea, and Over 70.
Yeah,
It's
Performing Flea was
books.
right.
These 3 books are essentially autobiography of Wodehouse. And especially there, he covers the war and the speeches he gave there and how he got persecuted. It's very interesting.
Right.
He's written a whole series of books on golf, by the way.
And the other thing I think,
Peace Smith.
yes, I'm sorry, Sunil was saying that all humorists have a traumatic childhood, but P.G. Wodehouse apparently, I don't think he had a traumatic childhood. According to his according to himself, yeah.
Abdul did mention that he was sort of away from his parents and that his
Yeah, but I
heart
don't think he had anything particularly troublesome. I mean, he got
Kenny,
a job
I
in the city, in the bank,
I
and
disagree.
In
I
fact,
disagree.
that struck me when Abdul was talking about the fact that he was separated from his parents and he was with various aunts. That isolation that came through very poignantly when Abdul was talking about it, Kenny. He may not have spoken about his trauma, but maybe there was some sort of sense of isolation. It just struck me that.
there would have been millions. They were, going to a public school when you were 7 or 5 or 7 was common in England. That society, I don't think it was
I
anything
think
different.
Anjali, you made a good point
Sunil
about
wanted to
isolation.
say something.
Because isolation it sort of couples up well with what Sunil was calling need for connection, because
In
of
fact,
that
Sunil
isolation.
wants to make a point now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. See,
Good morning, Sunil.
his father was in Hong Kong. He, as an infant, he left to go to England to stay with various aunts. Then he joined boarding school at the age of 12, Dulwich College, Dulwich School or whatever. Over there, he made friends. That was his first real emotional contact. And that's why, in his books, you'll only find aunts. There's rarely any reference to parents. Can you imagine for 12 years going without parents? I think that would be traumatic.
He wrote some lovely books about cricket and about boarding school, right? Mike and Smith, Mike and Riken, which I really like those books, in fact, much better than, even more than the pure humor.
Yeah.
See, if you see the Jeeves and Bertie Wooster relationship, and I looked it up in ChatGPT, See, the way it grows in the initial books, it's about Jeeves is treated as a manservant. Then it changes to that Jeeves is an advisor. Then it changes to that, look, he becomes inseparable with, he actually has pangs when he's separated from Jeeves. And towards the end, when Woodhouse is about 70 plus, he believes that friendship is the greatest thing there is. And his later books talk a lot about friendship. You should look it up in ChatGPT as to how his books have progressed over the years and how he started valuing friendship. I pulled it out and I can send it to Gautam. Gautam, I think I sent it to you, the 7 stages of friendship, and how Jeeves and Bertie Wooster have gone through those 7 stages through the books.
Please send it to me. I don't recollect having received it, and I'll share. I'll share with everyone.
Incidentally, Sunil, both your 40th reunion calendar as well as Crazy Bosses was really enjoyable. I looked at all 106 pages.
Yeah, so did I.
Particularly,
So did I. I love your books, Sunil. I read them and I have most of them. So thank you. I reread The Crazy Bosses this morning. It was lovely.
Although I think that Crazy Bosses is highly tilted towards the HR department.
I
I
like the best one I remember, Sandeep, is his hiring policy was based on Einstein's theory of relatives.
I like the one that talked about insider trading. What if I was outside the office when I did the insider trading?
Outside the room, I think he said. The office room. Yeah.
Terrific.
Okay, any other thoughts?
Just a quick word on the HR department. On the HR department, see, they're the most hated departments for most people. So they are the butt of the joke, and those victims, when they're victims, it's particularly funny to people.
Right.
Yeah.
Srinivas, go ahead. Srinivas, go ahead.
Is PG Wodehouse popularly read by baby boomers and then it lost out the flavor? What is your observation? I think millennials and Gen Z, do they read or do they know?
They don't read.
They don't read anything.
Actually, for the next generations, the books by J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, brought back the reading habit for them. So they were in a different context altogether by then.
For some time.
In
Do all
fact,
the Wodehouse books have a single publisher? Is it Penguin?
Largely, but not single.
Okay.
Largely Penguin, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had separate publishers in America and the UK, so some of the titles are different in the US.
For example, Blandings Castle in the UK, which all of us have read. In the US, it's called Blandings Castle and Elsewhere.
So Hutchinson was a British publisher. Hutchinson.
Sunil, my favorite one was the go ahead, unmute yourself. I thought that was just so.
Yes.
The boss is telling the guy face to face, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself. Absolutely. Wonderful. Really good.
Must be getting late for Suresh, right?
Yep.
Yes, but he is more awake than he has been in previous sessions.
Because of the humor.
Yes.
Laugh before you go to sleep.
Absolutely. Yes. So this has been wonderful. As I think Shankar said, one of the best
Delightful.
sessions among the ones we've had. So thank you, everyone,
Yeah,
including.
Sorry, can I just take half a second? I'm
Sure.
mailing something on the chat group to everyone. Oh, it doesn't take such a long chat. Oops. So this is, I had thought of doing this talk earlier, titled Friendship, the Heart of Bertie and Jeeves, very quickly. Oops, it's 7,000 words. Talk was stage one of the friendship, professional beginnings. He's a manservant. Jeeves, and a quote is, Jeeves was an exemplary manservant, efficient and uncomplaining, Bertie Wooster says this. Next stage, stage two, growing dependence. Powerful quote. When in doubt, I invariably turn to Jeeves for a solution. Stage three of friendship, the emotional attachment begins. The quote, without Jeeves, I felt rather adrift, unsure of myself. Stage four of friendship, mutual protection and support. Quote, Jeeves devises plans to prevent Bertie from romantic entanglements. Stage 5, deepening bonds and anxiety in separation. I couldn't sleep without Jeeves at my side. His absence was unsettling. Stage 6 of 7 stages. Stage 6 of friendship. Personal conversations and shared confidences. Quote, we discuss our personal aspirations and concerns, not just the latest predicament. Stage 7, unwavering support and loyalty. Quote, Jeeves, your support means the world to me. I'm trying to send it, but so let me mail it to Gautam.
Yeah, I'll do that. Nice.
Yeah.
Lovely.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Okay.
Okay.
So it's getting late. We've crossed the 90-minute mark. So thank you, everyone, for joining in. And I hope during this year, there are always 25 people in the audience. That would be the best thing.
Yeah. Terrific.
Terrific. Very good.
Thank you,
Very
Gautam.
good. Thank